Welcome to another video on diet and nutrition. We're looking more in this video at energy expenditure, energy balance, etc. Not so much specifically about the different macronutrients and micronutrients that we consume. Let's have a little scan through. So what is energy firstly? Energy is the ability to perform work. It's measured either in calories or joules. You probably use calories, which is more of a modern term I think, and more of a term in context with sport and physical activity. 1 calorie is equal to 4.18 joules, about a quarter of the size. A calorie is so small that we actually use kilocalories, and every time I say calorie I probably mean kilocalorie, like a lot of people. So 1,000 calories equals 1 kilocalorie. So a Mars bar actually contains 228,000 calories, but we say 228 calories, but we mean 228 kilocalories. Okay, because a calorie is just such a small unit, we have to use the kilocalorie. So energy, ability to perform work. Food labeling. Now you would have seen this on the back of food that you consume, and we can tell a lot from the back of packaging on food now. Some of it used to be a little bit hidden, now it's a little bit more clear. So we've got 2 packets here. See if you can guess what they might be from. So the first one in colour, the energy we're getting from it is 61 kilocalories per 100 grams. There's a bit of a clue there, I guess, in the fact that it says a pot. Protein is relatively high, 4.9. Carbohydrates, 6.9 per 100 grams is quite high. Quite low in fat, no fibre, and a pinch of salt in there as well. Minerals and vitamins down the bottom, you can see that calcium is 168. So there's 26% of your recommended daily allowance just in 100 grams of that. So that, I would say, probably looks something like a pot of yogurt, for example. Not fat-free, obviously, because there's some fat in there, but I would say a natural yogurt. And the one on the right hand side in black and white, this is a difficult one, I've had a look at this. It's got 8 grams of fat per serving, which is 55 grams. A large amount of carbohydrate, fibre, some sugar, small amount of protein as well, or a decent amount of protein. Some vitamins, some iron. I don't really know, I'm not 100% sure what this one is. I'm moving towards possibly bread, something like that, wholemeal bread maybe. But then the thing that's throwing me off a little bit is the fat content in it. It wouldn't normally be that high, but I don't actually know what that is. Something like that, I think. Maybe some bread. Government recommends that a 19 to 50-year-old in the UK should consume around 2,500 calories for men and 1,900 for women, perhaps a touch less. Sometimes you'll see different figures. But what about athletes? So it's going to be different, and we spoke about this energy intake in previous video. Obviously, it's going to be different for different people, different athletes. They require different amounts of energy. Energy intake simply means the food that we eat. Energy expenditure simply means the calories that we burn or we use. This doesn't just apply to athletes, it applies to everybody. Therefore, everyone will have a different energy intake and a different energy expenditure. Now, the amount of calories you should consume, or you'll be recommended to consume, will be based on your age, your gender, your size, the environment that you live in, and the lifestyle that you lead. It can all affect an individual's energy expenditure. Obviously, if you lead a very active lifestyle, you're going to need to consume more calories for fuel, for energy. If you lead an inactive lifestyle, you're not going to need as many. If you're a larger individual, you're going to need more calories. Depending your age might affect it. If you're an old age pensioner, for example, that probably goes hand in hand with you're not going to be as active as younger individuals, therefore you don't need as many calories. If you're a young athlete or a 25-year-old that has an active job and likes to exercise as well, you're going to need a lot more calories than an old age pensioner. That makes sense, right? Case study, Michael Phelps. You've probably heard of Michael Phelps. He's a hugely successful swimmer. 2008, he won 8 gold medals. He won 8 out of 8 races. and it's been reported, and this is quite a famous one, that he was consuming around 12,000 kilocalories per day, which is huge when you think most of us, or most men his size, probably consuming between 2,500, 3,000 maybe. How did he not become overweight when he's consuming 12,000 calories a day? Well, he was swimming for 5 hours a day, competing and training. So that's a huge amount of calories to burn. So there was a balance. He created an energy balance where he was just able to get enough fuel into the body to give him the energy to swim all these races and win these gold medals, but not too much that he was losing weight, but not too little that he wasn't able to perform. So he was well balanced. And you look at the example of his lunch: 500 grams of pasta, 2 large ham and cheese sandwiches with mayonnaise, and 1,000 calories of energy drinks just to top it up. Ridiculous. I might try and do that diet one day and do a video, see how I get on. I think I might struggle with that, bearing in mind he has a few breakfasts, a dinner similar to that, and snacks in between. Huge amount of calories to consume. Compare this to this jockey. This is reported that some jockeys will consume around 1,000 kilocalories per day, which is tiny. The lunch here is noodles with beef and green beans. I think I'd prefer Michael Phelps' lunch, to be honest. But this demonstrates that different athletes require different energy intakes. Now, obviously, a jockey needs to be as light as possible, because that's the nature of the sport. That you're going to be on the back of a horse, and a lighter mass is easier to carry than a heavier one. So you need to be light, and that could be the difference between winning, coming second, coming third, etc. But this diet isn't healthy. It isn't healthy to consume 1,000 calories per day for an adult. Okay, so usually if you're consuming such low amounts, you're probably going to be lacking in vitamins and minerals, macronutrients, proteins, and so it's not going to be healthy. It's not going to be an easy way. You would expect probably they are supplementing with vitamins and minerals somewhere, but it's still not a healthy diet to follow. And neither is the 12,000 calorie a day one. These are just the extremities of two types of diet. You wouldn't normally consume 12,000 calories a day, I would hope, because you're not swimming 5 hours a day every day. Key terms that we need to understand: energy expenditure is the sum of basal metabolic rate, the thermic effect of food, and the energy expended through physical activity. Now, what is basal metabolic rate? You usually hear it as BMR. It's the minimum amount of energy required to sustain essential bodily functions at rest. So this, for example, is your heart beating, your lungs inspiring and expiring, just the basic physiological processes that keep us alive. But this, however, accounts for 75% of our total energy expenditure, because we're doing it for 24 hours. Heart's beating for 24 hours a day. You don't turn it off, and it requires energy to do that. Same with the lungs, same with your brain working, same with other systems in your body. Thermic effect of food. Now, the energy required to eat, digest, absorb, and use food eaten, which accounts for a small percentage of total energy expenditure. Now, when you eat a food, you eat a banana, for example, it doesn't just straight away turn into energy without anything happening to it. It goes through your digestive system, it goes through a number of processes which, again, use energy within our body. So that's why protein is such a good source, because it takes a lot of energy to break down protein and get it into a usable source for our body. Maybe even up to 30% of the calories that you consume within a protein are used to burn, to process that protein. That's why it's such a great food to eat, protein. Okay. So thermic effect of food, basal metabolic rate, and then you've got your total energy expenditure. So how are we going to calculate our BMR? How do we know what our basal metabolic rate is and how many calories our body's going to burn in a day? Because we need to know that if we're going to try and program our diet, if we want to maintain our weight, if we want to lose weight, or if we want to gain weight, we need to have a starting point and a reference. So there are simple calculations you can use to estimate your BMR. They're not going to be exact, they're estimations, but if you, let's just talk about the equation first. Nowadays, there's plenty of apps. You can literally go onto Google, you can type in basal metabolic rate calculator, and you'll be able to type in some details, your age, your sex, blah blah blah, and it will give you a rough estimate. Now, if my estimate came out at 2,000, just for argument's sake, and I followed that, and I wanted to lose weight, and I burn 2,000 calories a day, and I only consume 1,500, and I still maintain weight, I know that calculation is not right. So you're going to have to adjust it, because like I said, we're all individual, and you'll get this calculation, but you're going to have to tweak it if you're using it to gain weight or lose weight or maintain your body weight. So BMR takes into account gender, weight, height, and age, but not body composition as well, which is another limiting factor of it, because you could get someone that was 100 kilos, for example, male, 40-year-old male, for example, who was of a muscular build, and the main sort of bulk of their body was muscle. You could get the same individual, same height, same age, but they could be, the main makeup of their body could be fat. They could be obese, but they're going to come out with the same calculation. Whereas we know that the individual with the large muscle mass is actually burning more calories, because having a mesomorph physique will burn more calories than having an endomorph physique. Muscles burn calories. That's why if you go to a personal trainer, they will try and build up some muscle mass, even if that's not your actual final goal, because they know that you're going to burn calories by having a healthy muscle mass in your body. So here's a Harris-Benedict formula commonly used to estimate BMR. Again, like I said, you can just type these into an app or into a website and get it. But if you wanted to do it old school, you can just use these equations here and just fill in the gaps, put your weight there in the kilogram section, height, etc., and your age. Okay. Let's have a look at the next one. Physical activity, energy expenditure. So physical activity usually accounts for around 30% of your total energy expenditure. That says nowadays, but you should be saying, oh, sorry, it does say nowadays you can measure kilocalories burned with an Apple Watch or a Fitbit. So this is the easy way to do it. Some people might have a more complex way of doing it, but you can, if I go for a run now, I'll put my Apple Watch on and it will tell me exactly how many calories I've burned. It will estimate. And if I'm tracking, I can put that into an app, for example, and I know how many calories I've burnt in a day. Therefore, I know how many calories I can consume to either balance it out or lose weight or gain weight. However, the accuracy of these Fitbits and watches is very limited. So it tracks your heart rate and estimates. Although you're putting your individual data in there, it can be really, really difficult. But the thing we learn about in PA level is something called METs, metabolic equivalent, which personally I feel is probably even a less accurate way of measuring your energy expenditure. It's basically a ratio of working metabolism compared to resting. So for example, with running, if we look at, let me enlarge this for you, 11.5 minute mile pace, it has a MET of 9. So it's 9 times harder than resting, for example. Yeah. So number 1 is doing nothing, resting, and a MET of 9 is 9 times harder, meaning it consumes 9 times as many calories as resting. Okay. Now again, if you look in that green box, you'll see some activities. So yoga 3.3 on the MET scale, dancing 6, basketball 8, skipping 9.8. Now the problem with this, and you could sit down and work it out. I played basketball for an hour at 8 METs, blah blah blah. I'm going to work out how many calories I've burned, but it's going to be different for everyone. So different standards of basketball, different intensities of basketball, and also in a game of football or basketball, you're not running at the same pace, sprinting. You're sprinting, you're running, you're resting. It might depend on the game, the situation. It's a bit easier with the running one because you're given an exact pace that you're running at. But in terms of accuracy, again, there are limitations. But if we are tracking, we have to use one method of doing this. Okay. Have a think. What sports do you do? What MET do you think they are? Justify it. Do you think that football will be above basketball or below? What about rugby? What about netball? Have a think about it. Maybe do one for your sport. Energy intake is the total amount of energy from food and drinks consumed and measured in joules or calories. Some people track calories on fitness apps or websites, for example, or use nutritional labels. If I'm tracking, I like to use my Fitness Pal. Just simple. It's an app on a phone, and it will have every bit of food on there. You can either scan a barcode of the food you eat, or you can manually type it in, and it will record the amount of calories that you're consuming per day. But not only that, it will break it down into fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, and also give you your mineral and vitamin intake as well. So you can track your macronutrients as well as tracking your calories. You can put your activities in there as well, and again you can work out whether on that particular day you've consumed more calories than you've eaten, or vice versa, and then you know if you're on track to either gain weight or lose weight, whatever your goal might be. We already know the average recommended diet for adults is this is the GCSE one: 55% carbohydrates, 30% fat, and 15% protein. That isn't the diet that I consume, because I've got slightly different ideas now, but that's what you're going to learn for A-level PE: 55% carbohydrates, 30% fat, and 15% protein. But there is a little asterisk. This can differ depending on individual needs of an athlete or a person. So an athlete probably is going to require a larger amount of carbohydrates, or a strength athlete, large amount of protein, and more endurance athletes, large amount of carbohydrates for energy. The protein obviously being for muscle repair. But not only that, they're going to require a larger amount of calories within their diet because they're more active, they're moving more. So therefore they need more energy in their body. Energy balance, and this is a key one, this is a simple term. Let's enlarge that. So energy balance will determine if an individual maintains, loses, or gains weight. The scales are balanced here, as energy intake is the same as expenditure. You can see that on the scales, although the boxes are bigger. Energy intake, for example, 2,000 calories, energy expenditure, 2,000 calories, therefore no weight is gained, you've maintained weight. If that energy intake was higher than the energy expenditure, you would gain weight. If the energy expenditure was higher than the energy intake, you would lose weight. This is the simplest way of looking at it. There's a lot more factors that go into it, but that's the basics of it. And most diets you see that claim to be effective, all based on a calorie deficit. Calorie deficit is when the calories you consume is less than the calories that you expend. It's that simple. Okay. Obviously, like I said, there's a lot more behind it, but that's the bulk of it. Now, questions that you might get in A-level haven't actually. I mean, I've just been looking online. Haven't seen any previous past paper questions on METs or energy balance, so to speak. Usually, what you'll get is a table with the diet that a current athlete is consuming, or an athlete is currently consuming, and it will say, for example, protein consumption 10% of diet, fat 40%, and then you will need to comment on it and give recommendations of how it would change. So depending on what they say in the question, assuming it's some sort of athlete, the likelihood is they would need to consume more protein for muscle repair, muscle recovery, enzyme production, for example, and they would need to reduce fat intake, because although we do need fats in our diet, and it might state a different type of fat as well, it might say saturated or unsaturated fat, we don't want to consume too much fat in our diet because it is calorie dense and it will increase our chance of obesity, for example. Their carbohydrate intake might be too low, therefore you might want to say they need to up their carbohydrate intake to around 55% from the current 40, 45, whatever it says in there, and this is to use for energy, for training, for competition. So they're the sort of common ones you get, giving you recommendations of how somebody can change their diet, or it might be sometimes the difference between a recreational athlete and a competing or a higher level athlete, a regional or international athlete, whatever it might be. And the thing is with that usually the higher performing athlete is likely to require more calories because they'll be training more, they'll probably be competing harder, they might need a higher protein content for recovery of muscles, etc., whereas a recreational might not need so much if they're only training once a week compared to the professional that's training maybe every day or 4 or 5 times a week. Okay, I'll do a video with some questions, some of the diet and nutrition questions that have come up. Like I said, there's not a huge amount, but we'll go through it, and we'll go through some others on macronutrients and micronutrients that I found today as well. Okay, good luck.